and to another episode of Tactical Enlightenment. This channel is dedicated to helping you get better at Bannerlord through the use of field command and advanced tactics. And in order to pull off advanced tactics, you need to understand how your units work in battle. This is continuing our series here where we're going to take a look at the three different types of troops in Bannerlord, right? Infantry, cavalry, and archers. And this is part 2 when we're going to continue to cover infantry. In particular, in this episode, we're going to cover formations and then a few of the tactical ideas that I've either developed or that, of course, we've learned throughout history that are effective in battle, and we're going to attempt some of those in this episode in Bannerlord. So again, I have this Aserai force here that has a large infantry amount. We have a large infantry amount. This battle is a side branch of the campaign that I'm in, and it's the perfect venue for us to effectively have a battle here, show some formations. I believe this map will be out in the open, so it'll be nice and easy to show you all the detailed formations without having a bunch of fucking trees in the way and things like that. And then we're essentially going to try to do a few things tactically with these infantry divisions. So we'll swing into battle here. One of the key things that I've mentioned before is that we're going to be breaking our infantry up into different divisions. In fact, I did this beforehand just to save some time. Now, I run 8 divisions when I play Bannerlord. This is difficult for some people, and if you're new to Bannerlord, this is probably going to be a little bit over your head. What I would say to the person who's just starting and maybe you're running 4 or 5 divisions, by the way, these are all the divisions I'm talking about, 1 through 8 here, these old Roman numerals. I would say start with less to begin with. Start with 5 or 6, or even just the 4, right, or 3 if it's starting you with infantry, cav, and archers. And then as your skills as a field commander get better, you can add more and more army divisions. As I mentioned in the previous episode, the reason I think it makes sense to divide them is that your troops then become more specializable. More specialized is probably the correct English for it here. So what I'm effectively going to do is I'm going to have 4 different infantry divisions. You see, the 2nd division is cav. The 7th and 8th are also cav, and that's some of our nobles and some of our high-ranking companions. I'm not really going to be focused on that in this episode, or the archers. What I want to do, though, is I want to make sure that I have nothing but infantry and the right makeup of infantry in each individual division. Maybe these two are like sisters or something. They look almost identical with their bear hats. So the other thing I'll talk about briefly too is captains for the group. So this is Gweth, I think. I want individual captains that are ideal for the division that they're going to be commanding. And that is important because your different infantry divisions have different roles. I talked about earlier the 3 main types, right? Your traditional tank infantry, which is spear, sword, and shield infantry. That will be our 1st division in this battle. The second kind I talked about was shock troops. That'll be represented by the 3rd division here, and then skirmishers. Now in this episode, I'm actually going to run with 2 skirmisher divisions. The 4th and the 6th will both be skirmisher divisions, and to dedicate these divisions to the specific types of units, and I think we're just going to dump the rest of these. These are all skirmishers, so we'll dump them over there. Those are all companions with various level of throwing skills. Actually, not all of them. She's actually bow, but most of those are throwing companions. You know what I mean by throwing? They have javelins, is I guess what I'm trying to say. We're going to have 2 different divisions of javelin throwers because I want to be able to flank, right? Flanking, if you're not familiar with it, it's this, right? It's having a division pointed like this, and then as the enemy approaches your division here, this 1st division, this 4th division will then attack them from the side, right? It's a very simplistic idea, but some people aren't really quite aware of what I'm talking about. When I say enfilade fire or flanking, that's what I'm referring to. And that, incidentally, is one of the most basic and powerful things you can do tactically on the battlefield. Try to get some of your troops astride the enemy force, right? However you do that, you can, of course, do multiple sides. You can do that, hell, if you're really good, you can even do that where you encircle the enemy. So we'll be experimenting a little bit with that. But first, let's cover the division of these different infantry units. Now, unfortunately, Tailworlds doesn't have the most perfect system for breaking up your infantry units. However, once you start to fight battles, you will start to develop a consistency. I almost always fight with the same units in the same divisions every time. That way, internally, in the middle of the battle, I don't have to like go to my cue card and be like, oh shit, 4th Division. I already know it's archers. Now in this battle, it's infantry, but this is just an example battle to show you the power of infantry. In all of my battles, skirmishers fill the 6th Division, and so because of that, I have a captain that's on there, and we'll talk a little bit more about captains in a second, but she's always, or is always, almost always, one of the captains of that skirmisher division. All right, so 1st Division is heavy infantry, and the only real way to do this is to tinker, and what I mean by to do this is to separate your divisions, is to tinker with these little settings. When you click this little button here next to them, you basically have the option to check or uncheck certain attributes for that division, and what it effectively does is the system tries to prioritize those units in that division. So if I want lots of guys, you can see that little sort of, it looks like half like an axe, half like a polearm. It says give preference to troops with polearms. We also want them to have shields because, as I mentioned before, this is going to be filling the role of that shield, speared slash sword infantry. And when I zoom in here, you can take a closer look. This is precisely the kind of unit I want in here. This is the Sturgian heavy spearman. There are some units that don't quite fit. There's a Vlandian sergeant. There are some shock troops in here, and what I'm effectively going to do is tinker with these different settings until it's optimal, until I have the right optimal mix in there. Now, it's okay if there's a few shock troops in the 1st Division. That's totally fine. But what I want is for more shock troops and the correct ratio to be in these other divisions. So the 3rd is shock troops, and I get that by selecting higher tier and heavy armor without any of these other designators. Obviously, if I select shields, there won't be any shock troops in there at all. Right? So if I go in here and I zoom in, now if I see guys in here with shields, that doesn't mean that the system is broken, it's not working correctly because there's guys with shields. What I'm telling the system by this slider bar is I want the X amount of guys in this division, in this case 61, and I want them to have heavy armor and high rank. Unfortunately, you can't tell it. I want to make sure there's no guys with shields in this division. Also a factor here is that you may not have that many shock troops, right? In this battle, I evidently don't have 100 shock troops because as soon as I get it to about 50 or 60, it starts putting in more guys here with shields. Now, this is not a disaster for our strategy. It's not going to be a problem strategically if only 90% of the division is shock troops, but you want to try to make this as close to 100% of the division type that you want it to be in there for it to be most effective. Now, why do we care about that? All right, so I have these shock troops. You notice the shields here, or the lack of shields, right? There's a couple guys that have shields, but a lot of these guys do not have shields. That's a problem, right? If these guys have no protection, if they're just charging at the enemy and the enemy has a bunch of archers or even heavy cav, they are going to cause major damage. Like I talked about in the previous episode, shock troops are highly vulnerable. These guys right here are highly vulnerable to cav and archers and skirmishers, right? Because they have no way of blocking incoming projectiles, and heavy cav charging them is also a problem. So we're dividing these divisions, and all I'm doing here is this effectively is like checking on my troops. I'm like the general riding by on horse, making sure, okay, the 4th Division, I get that by selecting shields and javelins, and I want these guys, when I zoom in here, I want to see the javelins on their back and a shield in front. Now, there's almost no units in the game that have just javelins and no shield, so you're generally going to see shields, and then you're like, well, this guy doesn't have any javelins. What the fuck? Well, that's because the game doesn't separate the axe throwers. You see this guy's got 2 different tranches of axes down here. These are guys with throwing axes, and the game doesn't allow you to differentiate from that. I would prefer those guys weren't in there, but that's just the system we have, and so this is the best we're going to be able to make of it. Now you also see this. This is a legionary. This fucking guy has no projectile weapon. He has a spear, he has a mace, and he has a shield, and no projectile weapon. Again, I cannot tell the game, make sure only guys with throwing weapons are in this division. There's a limited amount of flexibility that you have as a commander to set up these units exactly how you want. Now this is unfortunate. It fucks with our strategy a little bit, but not so much to make it irrelevant, right? I still want these divisions to, when I come in and zoom here, I want to say, okay, I want to have mostly skirmishers in this 6th Division, and if there are too many of other type of units, try lowering the numbers, because what's probably the case is that you have too many shock troops or too many spear and shield troops to have X amount of in this case, you know, javelin throwers or shock troops or whatever the thing is that you want for that battle. All right, so the first division, that's going to be basically what I consider our meat shield infantry. These are going to be the guys that are going to be absorbing the main enemy infantry attack. Generally, the AI, whether it's RBM or another mod, they will attack your largest infantry division with a large mass of their troops. We will see how this battle plays out against the Azurai and see if that actually occurs here or not. But we have this infantry division, and a lot of these guys are your standard shield and spear infantry, like these Sturgian heavy spearmen. Now you do see some guys with javelins mixed in here. Again, it's really okay if there are some, but most of these guys have spears, shields, and a sword. So this is our meat shield guys. Our third division, again, I'm just covering this very quickly in case you didn't understand. This is mostly shock troops. Again, it's not all. I see some guys in here with shields, but there's a lot of guys in here with Ramphalias. There's a lot of guys in here with two-handed axes. Some of my companions are in here with two-handed axes, okay? So this is a shock division, and like I said before, we're gonna talk about protecting that in a minute. The 6th division here, lots of guys with shields, and then lots of guys with javelins, right? This is the 6th, I believe. No, this is the 4th, excuse me. So this is the 4th. There are some guys without javelins, but most of these guys do have projectile weapons. Most of these guys do have a tranche of javelins. And again, the 6th, that's also skirmishers. And I'll talk about that once we start setting up formations of why I want multiple guys with javelins. All right, now my archers in this battle are the 5th Corps, and we're really not going to focus them on this battle. I'll talk about archers in a whole separate episode, but we're going to keep these guys in the back, towards the rear, protecting them with our infantry divisions, and in this formation, which is spread. Okay, that's all basically I'm going to tell you about the archers for this battle. Similarly, our cav divisions, all I'm going to be doing with our cav division here, the 2nd, 7th, and 8th, is kind of positioning them in a way to somewhat support our infantry. The focus of this episode and the focus of this battle, though, is to show you how to use your infantry, how to divide them, and then different formations and ways you want to use these guys to have success in battle. All right, so formations is the next component. You can divide your units into the divisions, but if they're in a shitty formation like this, it's going to work poorly. Infantry should be really in one of 2, maybe 3, and there's potentially a 4th option as far as formations. You get your formations, of course, from the F2 menu. You get this myriad of different formations you can use, and some of them are worthless. You do not want to have your infantry spread like this, right? These guys are going to be best fighting close together. That way, when the enemy's shooting at them, their shields are kind of overlapping, etc. So we want infantry in shield wall, something like that, usually 2 or 3 men deep. Or we want them in a square, which is F2, F5. Now a square is best if they're being attacked from multiple sides, especially if it's horse archers, or they're somehow surrounded, or if we're using them as bait, and I'll talk about that also. Other formations you can use them in, you can definitely use them in a circle, but this is a very complicated tactic to use. In fact, I have a whole episode that I'm working on to talk more about the use of circle formations and how this can be effectively deployed in Bannerlord. We won't get too deep into the weeds of every single formation. I don't need this to be a 5-hour episode. All right, so another formation that is viable is a skein, but the size of your formation matters. This is a single lined skein, and this is not effective. If your infantry, again, is super spread out, even if you have them in a shield wall and they're in a super long line, here's the problem with that. If there's any guys in here, and there's a few, that don't have shields, these guys will fucking stand there while the enemy's shooting at them, and they will get drilled by arrows. They will suffer damage. Now, these are shock troops. I wish I could manually stick these guys in the 3rd division, because clearly that was my intent, is to have my shock troops in the 3rd division. The best I can do is sort of tinker with these bars until they kind of disappear or there's less of them in this division. What I was saying, though, is if your guys are in a big long line like this, look at this guy. He's got his spike. This guy's one of those pikemen. If you're in a big long line like this in a shield wall, and the purpose of a shield wall is to protect you from arrows, these guys in single walled lines like this get shot to death, and they will fucking stand there until they're shot to death. They're very obedient troops. And the problem with that, of course, is if you're trying to use this shield wall, protect yourself from arrows, this single line of infantry really long like this is not very effective. What I recommend is a double line. So we're going to take these guys and we're going to tighten them up. Now you see the little green things there? I'm using the RTS mod, which gives this nicer, more colorful, you can stretch this little formation by holding down the mouse. Again, that would be single. That's not so good. I would prefer your shield wall look something like that if you're going to use a shield wall. Again, a square is automatic. It's just going to put them into a not a rectangle, but an evenly sided formation. And a skein, if you're gonna use a skein, and it has limited uses, it has some uses. Some guys are a fan of it. I'm not. I haven't seen it be very successful. Again, you want them to be about 2 deep. That way, it's likely that the guys that have a pike are standing behind someone else who has a shield. Right? That's a simple point, but it's the reason you don't want to have your troops in a big long line like that. Okay. The other formations are largely useless except line formation. Now, line is F2, F1. And why would you use that? Basically, these guys will still block some incoming projectiles with their shield. It doesn't mean they just throw their shield on the ground and ignore it. The advantage of line is they move quickly. When they're in shield wall, especially a tight massed shield wall, and you tell these guys to move, they will move very slowly, like half speed or even less than half speed. Obviously, if you're trying to get to a location quickly and move your troops around, and most of the time you want to move quickly, having them in a shield wall means they're going to take fucking forever. And if you have tactics that require speed, it's not going to work very well for you. So, line formation is actually usable as your infantry. You can actually put them into spread too for movement because they will move faster in this formation. And spread, in fact, if you're worried about them being shot by archers, you might have them move and spread, and then as soon as they get to the position you want them to be in for that battle, you move them to shield wall. This is why it's essential that you get quick at maneuvering your different troops. That way they can be in a shield wall and all of a sudden the enemy surrounds you with cavalry and you say, okay, fuck you with your cavalry or horse archers. We just go into a circle or a square at a moment's notice. You must, as a battlefield commander, and I say you must, if you want to be a good battlefield commander, you must know these commands and be able to do them fluently on the battlefield. It's kind of like speaking Spanish or even Russian. Today, if you don't speak good Russian and you make a journey to Russia, you're likely not to leave. I apologize if that offends anybody, but that's just the political reality of it. Right? You want to be fluent here, otherwise you're not going to have a lot of success. All right, so that's infantry and formation. In particular, this relates to this first division, right? The two best formations, and I'll be using frequently with these guys, is the shield wall and the square. All right, so your shock troops. Now, your shock troops, I've mentioned this repeatedly. We're going to want to protect these guys, right? Now, here's how we're going to protect them in this battle. Here is our strategy and tactics for this battle, and I'm basically going to show you what we're trying to set up before the enemy arrives at our location. I want to have our infantry in a shield wall, something like that. Behind them, we're going to have archers. And then on the two sides, what we're basically going to have is we're going to have skirmisher divisions on both sides of this central infantry division. Now, one of them we want to be larger than the other one, and I'll explain in a second. So I'm making it a little larger. You can see the 4th skirmishers is now 60 guys. I think it stole. By the way, if it's stealing from your other units, you can just hit this lock button. And now, no matter what you change with the other ones, your 2 other divisions will stay roughly the size that you wanted them to be at, right? So we've got 110 men in the 1st. That's the main infantry line. They're in a shield wall here. And then we have this 57 shock troops. Again, we'll zoom in just to make sure these guys didn't turn all these guys into the incorrect troops. And again, you see there's mostly Ramphalias. There's mostly guys that have axes and no shield. So these guys, like I said, are vulnerable to cav and archers. So what do we do about that? All right, so we're going to protect them. I told you we're going to make one of our skirmisher divisions larger. Right now that those divisions are locked off, I can make one bigger. You see one is 62 and the other is 34, right? So the smaller of the 2 divisions we're going to put on the left, and the larger we're going to put on the right. And I almost always do this kind of a setup. And again, this goes back to the consistency. You're going to want to have your units consistently where you expect them to be. Now, unfortunately, there's a horse rider or 2 in here. It's not perfect, but the bottom line is now most of these skirmishers in the 6th Corps, again, I zoom in here, most of these guys have throwing axes or javelins. They're on our right flank, okay? This again, we're basically going to be thinking about flanking the enemy before the battle starts. Eventually, we will be bringing up the 4th and the 6th in battle, and the idea is to have our center infantry sort of hold down the enemy, attract their attention. We might even have them form a square so that the enemy sort of attacks this big, strong ball of tough infantrymen, and then our skirmisher divisions throw javelins at them from the sides, right? This strategy I'll be talking about more is called tank and flank. Basically, I guess it's the other way. It should be the other way around. It should be flank and tank. We're using these guys to flank the enemy, throw javelins, and then once they're out of javelins, these guys get told to charge. The enemy's in here attacking, and the next thing you know, they have fucking a bunch of very capable melee fighters of skirmishers attacking them from the side. If we time things right, if we do it right, we will have 2 different infantry divisions attacking them from the side. And this is, again, a winning strategy in Bannerlord. Anytime you can flank the enemy, you're going to have success. All right, so the 1st, 4th, and 6th, and at the beginning of the battle, we're just going to set them up like this. And the reason I'm doing this is because if you start up with your units like this, you know, they're like, all right, enemy, I need you to run directly in here to attack our 1st infantry. There's a chance that the enemy takes the brunt of their infantry and just attacks your skirmishers right here. So you actually want to start the battle basically lined up like football players or soccer players before the match starts. You want them, you don't want them to be offsides, so you want to have your units spread out like that. Now I told you the 3rd, that's going to be our shock troops. When these guys go into battle, I'll want these guys in either line formation or even spread. And the reason for that is that these guys swinging these giant pole arms, if they're very close to their compadres, right? If you have these guys in a shield wall or something that's too tight, basically it's going to be ineffective for them because they can't swing these giant weapons. Anybody who's used a 2-handed pole arm, if you're surrounded by enemies, every time you try to swing from the side, you hit one of your own troops, and of course there's no friendly fire, but it still negates your attempt to attack. So when these guys fight, we want them either in line or spread formation. Okay, that's something else that's vital to consider. And here's what we're going to do with them. We are going to protect them with this line of skirmishers, right? This is what I call a shield and shock strategy. As the battle develops and we start to move our skirmishers to the enemy's side, we are going to move our 3rd shock troops behind these skirmishers. That way, if the enemy turns to bear on our skirmishers, right, we have this strong line of shield infantry ahead of them, and as soon as they get through that, all of a sudden these axe-wielding murderers start to fucking lop off heads left and right. Now, anybody can see that we're clearly vulnerable right here, right? This side is now completely unprotected. The skirmishers are here. The shock troops are here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use our cav corps. I talked about this before. Our cav corps are going to play defensive roles in this battle. Because we don't have very many of them, we are going to set them up here in a big shield wall, just like this. And their job effectively is to limit how much enemy archers shoot our shock troops, right? You can see if these guys are right here, especially if they're tight together. And by the way, they can be tight together before the battle starts. You can have them approach in a line like this, or even a shield wall. I would discourage this though, because they'll move slow in a shield wall. I would prefer they were in line like this. That puts them kind of close to each other. It makes it easier to protect them, right? If they're in this huge spread like this, it's much easier to, or much harder rather, to protect these guys from enemy cav. But if they're in a tighter ball like that, in a line formation, much easier to protect. So we're going to use our cav here, and it's even better to use them like 2 deep. I'll talk about this in a cav episode. We'll get to all that. But if your cav is in a single line deep, it basically doesn't protect from enemy archers or enemy cav, as well as this double line. Now, of course, it makes it shorter, but I would prefer it look something like that as the enemy's approaching. Again, you have to remember this is a moving battle, and so we're not going to start like this. We're going to start with our units off to the side here, and then as the battle sort of begins and the action happens, just like a chessboard, we're going to move our pieces into killer position before they strike, right? Just like chess, all your winning is actually done before you start taking pieces, right? You're theorizing a game plan, and then you're executing it on the battlefield. So as our skirmishers come up, these infantry will come in behind, and then the heavy cav will be right here to protect those guys. I might even do this. I might even put horse archers and our 8th Corps, which is our best knights, right there, because these guys are so vulnerable and so important. If I can get these guys fairly undamaged into the enemy ranks, these guys are going to cause major damage, especially if before that happens they're attacked by skirmishers on that side, skirmishers on that side, the infantry in the middle, all these javelins hit them, and then you can imagine what happens if our 3rd Division wades into the enemy on this weakened force, surrounding them, flanking them with these 2-handed weapons. Very quickly the enemy force will melt away. All right, so I know that's a lot. I know that's a lot to consider. You know, fortunately, this is YouTube. You can just simply fucking rewind. You can rewind. You can practice this with custom battles, by the way. I would recommend you use Britannia because, again, they have sort of the 3 optimal, what I consider pure infantry types, right? The shield, shock, the shield, sword, and spear infantry. They have the shock troops and their veteran falksmen. And then, of course, they have the wildlings as your skirmishers. They have all clearly defined types, and I think it would be an easy kingdom to practice with. So we're going to try different strategies in this battle. I'm not going to cover all of them because you can't, frankly, do every single thing in every single battle. But what we're effectively going to try to do is lure this Aserai force in, have them attack our first, either like that in a square, or we'll have them just slam into our front line in a shield wall. After that, after they come up, we'll bring in our skirmisher units here from the side. We will protect them with cav. We will move in our shock troops behind them. And then hopefully, if we execute our tactics correctly, we will annihilate the enemy. All right. Let's give this a shot here. Again, I'm going to rewind this battle a couple times because I want to show you some other options for infantry. This is just one way to attack and destroy the enemy, right? There's many ways to do this. So again, we're going to start sort of at the starting position here, and your terrain is somewhat important. If your skirmishers are down beneath a ridge, and they can't see, like this is just an example here. You see this hill? If my skirmishers are right here, let me just show you. If my skirmishers are right here, even better down there, and I want them to throw javelins at the end, I guess I better cover that real quick. How about distancing on skirmishers? Skirmishers will not throw javelins 800 yards away, right? It's not effective, even though they do that in the Olympics for distance. You want your skirmishers to be about 40 or 50 units from the enemy. 30, 20 is like the closest because you don't want these guys getting attacked. You want them throwing their javelins from a safe distance, holding up their shield. You want them about the distance I'm showing here. Now, you won't be able to master this in the distance until you play a lot, but I'm just kind of telling you what you're aiming for. Okay, if your infantry's there, you might start your skirmishers off here. And then when you tell them to attack, you either want them holding the line like that in shield wall. In other words, you're not telling them, hey, I want you guys to charge. What you're going to do with them is you basically have them go to that position and leave them alone. They will throw javelins on their own. They're programmed to do that. If they're not throwing javelins, they're either out of javelins or they're too far away. If I position my skirmishers back here, they won't hit those guys. But what I was saying about line of sight is if your skirmishers are right here and your infantry is here, even though you're close enough for these guys to throw javelins, look at the line of sight. You as the battlefield commander must understand that they physically can't see your infantry. Say it's right there. You can see, we can't see those guys, and so of course they won't throw javelins at the enemy attacking them. Line of sight is important. You as the battlefield commander must sort of get down with your men into the field and sort of understand the lay of the land for this to be successful. Now, what I actually want is I want my skirmishers in an optimal world up higher than the enemy, so they're throwing javelins down. They will have higher range. They will be charging down at the enemy. It will do more damage. So that's what I'm gearing for. That's what I'm looking for. All right, enough talking. Let's have some action, shall we? Now we're going to do this battle here from the ground level. I'm going to turn the volume down just a touch on this, just so you can understand what I'm saying. All right, so we are going to have a battle here. Let's see where the enemy is. I've got a nice little area here, a nice little dip.
Infantry!
If the enemy doesn't attack us, of course, that'll be kind of problematic. I'll have to reload this battle. I'll probably just cut the video. But I anticipate them attacking us. The Aserai, in this case, did actually physically initiate the combat, and they have a larger force. So the likelihood of them attacking is significant.
Cavalry! Footmen forward!
So you can see what I'm doing here. I'm positioning it kind of just like we talked about before. I've got the first, this is the first infantry. I'll just try to tell you what I'm doing. That's the first, this is the sixth. Now you do notice I am starting to angle them already. That's okay. What you don't want is you don't want to put your skirmishers way out here because the enemy will simply attack them first. They will also attack them with cav, which obviously we don't want to have happen. All right, so next we're protecting them with cav, right? You can actually see skirmishers there, cav there, just like we talked about, right? Acting as a shield wall for them. Now run off the map here. So again, I have my skirmishers here, and I can just hold this number and keep it held so I know exactly where they're set up on the battlefield. That allows me very easily to slow down my horse. We'll turn it here, take my 3rd division, and we'll just plop these guys right behind. So that means I have the skirmishers here, and directly behind them, I have these shock troops. Now in this case, I'm actually spreading them out because they're on this hill. The enemy theoretically is going to be able to hit them with arrows if they're behind him, right? It's a little bit of a weakness of that part of it. And then I'm also going to put the skirmishers and 8th Corps up there just to give them more support. So you could tell one thing that's happened in this battle is we have a right side heavy flank. The skirmishers are over there, that's the 6th. The shock troops are over there, that's the 3rd. The horse archers are 7th. The 8th is elite knights, and the 2nd is heavy cav. That's 5 divisions that are over on that side, okay? So we do have a tilted battlefield here. We're heavily leaning on our right flank. The directional stuff, by the way, that has to do with left and right when you are facing the enemy. So there's the enemy numbers out there, and I've talked about it before, but the top number, that represents how many. So that is 22 horse archers or javelin throwing cav, and that lower number is the amount of yards the way the enemy is away from you. So they are roughly 215 yards, and the number's going down. That means they are closing on us.
Infantry.
All right, so we're moving the 1st infantry into position here. I'm actually going to tilt them a little bit more. And we'll put the 4th skirmishers over here also in a shield wall. Finally, the archers, like I said before, are not going to be a major part tactically. Now, they're going to be part of this battle from the perspective of they're going to be getting kills. We're going to give them a little bit of elevation behind all of our divisions. Of course, we want them protected. This is a very fundamental, basic thing. But just in case someone didn't understand that part, that's what we're going to do there. All right, now you see the number there on the bottom. Their infantry line there, it looks like it's 294. I got to differentiate between the archers. They have an archer division right next to them. It looks like they have 100 and they don't have very many cav. They have 3 different cav divisions here. They have two heavy cav divisions and 1 javelin cav. And unfortunately, their archers and infantry are sort of overlapping. It looks like they have 234 archers. And I think it's 294 infantry, right? So it's this huge tranche of infantry, and they're bearing down on us precisely like we want, right? You got some of these guys that are sort of leading the way here. I'm probably not going to fight that much in this battle, although I am going to kill some of this infantry, because what I don't want is the enemy to engage in infantry or archer war here. We have an infantry heavy army. I actually anticipated the Aserai in this battle having a lot more infantry than archers. The game, it looks like it said, hey, you know, let's put more archers in our division. So it's starting with more archers. Nevertheless, at some point or other, they will come and attack us. I'm just killing this cav because this is not really necessary for the demonstration for me to show you how to deal with cav. Although I can tell you that the formations we've set up here, they do defend pretty well against cav, right? We've got these shield wall cav over here. The 2nd division is sort of preventing heavy cav from charging us. The skirmishers here are blocking some arrows. In this case, we're actually going to move our 3rd corps. This is the vulnerable shock troops way into the rear here behind all this other cav. And I'm quickly putting them in a square. The reason I'm doing that is because the enemy is shooting at us with their archers, and we want to minimize how much damage they take. Now our archers are going to work here. We're doing some pretty good damage, and I'm going to continue to sort of attack the enemy because this whole battle is all about the infantry fight, and I don't want their archers just stalling us out here and waiting fucking 10 minutes before this fight starts. This part's sort of unavoidable. Hopefully I avoid getting shot off my horse here. I think before too long, because they're taking a beating, that their infantry will come up, and then we'll be able to get this demonstration. It's possible I might even edit this whole episode and just fast forward to where their infantry actually decides to engage. Look how easy I'm just mowing through their archers, right? That's heavy, strong skills in riding. All right, so the real dance is on here. Here comes their giant fucking wave of infantry, 290 guys, and we've barely been able to weaken it at range. So an infantry battle is inevitable here. And again, we want them to bite on our trap, on our plan. To get them to do that, I'm actually going to take our 1st division, pull it back just a bit, and I'm going to start moving units. The 4th is way over there. We're actually going to send them kind of way away from the enemy. And over here, we're bringing our skirmishers. This is part of the flanking I talked about earlier. You're going to want to be able to do this fast in real time. Now, fortunately, I can just use this slow-mo, right? We can say, okay, the game is allowing us to go slow here, so we're going to move this 6th corps over there to the side, and like I said before, we're going to put cav in front of them to protect them. The cav is not very important for this battle, so I'm just not too worried about it. All right, so we're moving skirmishers over there. And then we're going to move that 3rd infantry division into line so that they move quickly. And we're going to put them behind the skirmishers. Now you see their infantry is coming in quickly. That's fine. Now they're barreling right at our infantry. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to leave these guys in a shield wall and not attack. We don't actually want them attacking. They're going to be simply in a shield wall. If you don't have them charged, they will do their very best to stand there in a shield wall and hold off the enemy. They won't attack, they won't charge. Now, what's happening already? The enemy's getting pounded by projectiles. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see. I'm kind of zooming in, but your skirmishers are already, there comes a throwing axe. They are already pounding the enemy from the sides. Okay? Here, I think I can turn it to the 5th, and it'll be a little easier to see the action that's going on here. The other thing that's happening is the infantry really has magnetized to our center line level. Right? So now it's time to close the vice. These skirmishers have been throwing javelins. We're going to bring them up. You see some of the enemy infantry is kind of coming off to the flank here. We're going to bring both of these divisions up to basically start to entrap this infantry. The last thing, of course, as I talked about, we also want to bring our 3rd division up. But the enemy infantry is very much infatuated with our 1st division here. Some of their guys are kind of holding back. Our skirmishers are advancing here. And behind them, nicely protected, are our shock troops. And here's where the strategy starts to take effect. You can either manually point these guys like that, that's the skirmishers, into battle. And the same thing with the 3rd division. Or the other thing you can do that's probably a little bit more effective is to move them in, and then once they're close, have them charge. That's the F1-3 command. F1, F3, right? So I've now just moved our 2 flanks in on the enemy, right? This is basically like squeezing the vice in on the enemy. You can see they still outnumber our infantry line there, 205 to 86, but it's about to go down rapidly. All of these skirmishers here are firing javelins, right? Some of the guys are actually already engaged in melee, but most importantly, and the archers are doing some damage here, so I'm actually going to assign our cav divisions at this stage to attack their archers. That'll hopefully drive them off or kill some of them. This is the real battle, though, that I want you to focus on. Now that these guys are close enough, we tell the 6th to charge. We drag the 3rd literally behind the enemy, because we're not going to allow any of these fucks to escape, and the 4th skirmishers on this side is also told to charge. Now, as the 4th charges, we're going to charge at the 1st, too. We want all of these different divisions attacking the enemy. Now, look at where the enemy's retreating to. The enemy's sort of trying to regroup right into the fucking jaws of our shock troops. So we select them and tell them, now is your time, boys. Break out those 2-handed weapons, kill everything in sight. And these guys here, you can kind of see them wailing away there. They look like they're radiologically active or something like that. They're all green. The enemy is absolutely surrounded here and completely getting butchered by our 4 different divisions. Now I'm just going to let it play out in real time, and you can watch the death span. That was something like 215 or 220 enemy infantry that just vaporized because of that assault. Look at green, green, green. The death span is just totally covering the whole screen, and almost no deaths by us, right? The enemy is just absolutely eviscerated there, even though they outnumbered us. Even though they had more infantry than our 1st infantry division there, none of that fucking mattered. They got completely skewered. All right, so we're going to move up troops here to see if there's another wave. I think this actually might be the end of this episode, or at least this wave. We'll see if they get another big infantry wave here. I'm going to let this play out for another 60 seconds. We're actually going to reset our formations here. The reason I'm doing that is because the enemy has a ridge here. It's kind of hard to see with all the blue glowing horses, but we won't be able to attack them and shoot them until they're right on us. So we're going to actually move back. So the archers get moved way to the back. The 1st infantry in the center in a shield wall. All this should be familiar with. You should be familiar with if you've been paying close attention to the instructor, friends. Then all of these formational moves should be starting to ring a bell. It should start to look familiar to you, right? We've got the 1st infantry line there. In fact, we're moving back a little bit more, and the 4th goes right over here, right? All of these moves are almost identical to how we had it set up. 8th, 7th, 6th, and then the archers right behind him. And now we'll have all these guys hold fire. What I'm hoping, I don't think so, but what I'm hoping is the enemy gets some reinforcements here so that they have more infantry so we can have yet another demonstration of this. But hopefully that was sufficient enough, right? Again, if you didn't see it very closely, you can always feel free just to go back and look, right? I tried to do it in slow-mo so you can easily see it. The daylight is kind of an issue here. I didn't realize that I had this. It's called a time pass mod. It actually allows daylight to pass during the battle. Whoops! I just told my cav to dismount. I didn't want to do that. Get back on your horses. All these guys, I can tell them to just get back on their horses. The enemy's kind of charging us here with weak-ass horse archers. These guys have no chance in hell. What I meant to do is tell everybody, go ahead and fire. That way, if the enemy does have another infantry wave coming from reinforcements, we'll be able to have yet another demonstration here. Okay, they actually just did get another demonstration, but I'm concerned actually about your visibility at this stage. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see very well. So what we're going to do is we're going to run this entire battle again, and we're going to set up similar strategies to that and give you more ideas about how to annihilate the enemy with infantry, right? We're going to divide them into specialized units, and we're going to continue just to absolutely destroy the opponent here with tactics. So let me know what you thought about this episode. Next time I'll try to make sure it's in broad daylight. I'll actually just turn the time pass mod off. Hopefully most people watching this aren't watching it on a bright subway. If you are, I apologize. We will work on the lighting, right? Sometimes like on a movie set, you can't see the actor's face and they have to shoot the whole clip over again. Hopefully that's not the case here. Hopefully you still got enough out of this to be able to learn some things for your own game. So thanks again for watching, friends. This is part of a series. We might have ended up doing like 5 or 6 with infantry because there's actually a whole lot more that you can do with infantry, but I think that was a pretty good example about how you can use the specialized forces of your infantry to absolutely mangle the enemy. Here, we'll just do a little recap here of the battle so far. Okay, we've had 2 guys killed and 63 injured, and the enemy has 600 injured and 103 killed, right? This is an absolutely destructive victory, and as you can see, that's despite the fact that we're outnumbered, right? This is I understand there are variables at play here that make it lopsided, like our very powerful 8th Corps. I do understand these points. But the point is that you yourself should be able to have success. We may do some of these episodes using a custom battle window where it is all the same, and you yourself should be able to have similar type success in your own game. So thanks again for watching, friends. Stay tuned for more, and I will see you guys next time.